Sometimes a story hits the news and it just stays with you. It's like a punch to the gut.
Yeah.
This is one of those stories for me. We're doing our deep dive on this really horrific event in Michigan. It's just awful. A family shattered by this senseless violence. It's tough to even process.
Yeah, this is one of those cases that really gets under your skin, you know? It makes you think about the dark side of human nature, especially when it happens within a family where you should feel safe.
And I think that's what's so disturbing about this. It's not a stranger. This is a 13-year-old girl, and she's accused of killing her 7-year-old sister. And the details we're looking at from the Dayton Daily magazine, they're really chilling, I'm not going to lie. Multiple stab wounds. They say she used 2 different knives. It's brutal.
What gets me, what's really hard to grasp is what supposedly set this off. A note about flushing the toilet. I mean, come on, sibling arguments, we've all been there, right?
Oh, totally. My brother and I, we had some epic fights over the TV remote back in the day. But this is a whole other level. It makes you wonder, how does it even get to that level of rage, especially in someone so young?
And that's the question, isn't it? I mean, sibling rivalry is normal, part of growing up, but this kind of violence, thankfully, it's extremely rare, especially with kids that young.
So let's get into what we know happened. And fair warning, some of this is hard to hear. The Dayton Daily Magazine article and police reports, they say the parents left the 13-year-old in charge, a pretty typical, babysitting situation. Then they argued about this toilet note, and that's when it gets bad. Instead of just letting it go, the report says the older sister waited in the bathroom for her little sister to come in.
That's what gets me, that waiting, the planning. That's not just a spur-of-the-moment thing. That's chilling. It suggests, this wasn't just a burst of anger. There was a really disturbing thought process there.
And it gets worse. The report says she used a butcher knife from the kitchen, but, and this is awful, it wasn't getting the job done. So she went and got a bigger knife, a Bowie knife, from another room.
Oh, God. The fact that she switched weapons, that says it all, really. Just
Yeah.
horrifying. The level of intensity, the determination, just awful. To think that a young person could be capable of that, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around.
And then, after it happened, she called her stepdad before calling 911. That sends chills down my spine, I gotta be honest.
Yeah, that's a really disturbing detail. I can't speculate on this girl's state of mind or anything, but I will say, child psychologists, they say there's a few reasons a kid might call family before 911 in a situation like that. Sometimes it's about wanting comfort, someone familiar, even with something horrible happening. Or sometimes it's like this desperate attempt to get back some control when things have gone so wrong. Whatever the reason, it reminds us that we're talking about a child who just went through something unimaginably traumatic.
And that's important to remember. Even with an act this horrific, she's still a child. Which brings us to the legal side. And it's complicated. She's being charged as a juvenile, not an adult.
Right.
So then it's like, what does justice even look like in a case like this?
It's the big question, right? The whole point of the juvenile system is to try to balance holding someone accountable with the fact that they're young, that they can still change. The prosecutor, K, said this means they have 7 years to work with this girl. Diagnosis, treatment, hopefully rehabilitation.
So the hope is that even after something this awful, she can be rehabilitated.
That's the goal, at least. Worthy said what she hopes is that this girl will, quote, not be a danger to others. But that's a huge unknown in all this, right? It makes you confront this question of punishment versus rehabilitation, especially with kids.
And, that's what I keep coming back to. How do we even try to make sense of something like this? What would make someone, a kid, go this far? I know we can't get into this specific case too much, but in general, what does research tell us? What are the things that can cause this kind of extreme violence in families?
Yeah, you're right. It's impossible to unpack it all in one conversation, but it's such a good point, and I think it gets missed a lot. We focus on the what, the details, the awful things that happened. But just as important, maybe even more, is the why. Why would a kid with so much life ahead, why would it ever get to the point where this seems like the only answer?
That's what just gets me. It seems impossible to even imagine.
And that's what we got to remember. There's almost never just one thing. It's not simple. It's this mix of things, like how vulnerable a kid is, how the family works, pressures from outside, whether they can get help or not. Like all these risk factors, they pile up. It's like a perfect storm,
So it's not just, it's mental health or it's a messed up family. End of story.
Right, exactly. Those things can play a part, but it's always more complicated. Let's say you have a kid who has mental health stuff going on that's not being dealt with, and then there's violence at home, and on top of that, They can't get help, no mental health services. Now you've got this really dangerous combination.
Makes sense. Like one thing makes the next thing more likely to happen.
That's it, exactly. So that's why it's so important to step in early to prevent things from getting to that point. We need to make it okay for kids, for teenagers, to get help for their mental health. No shame, no stigma. And families need support, need ways to handle conflict so it doesn't explode. It's about building those skills, those coping mechanisms, way before it gets to crisis mode.
So it sounds like what you're saying is we need to be coming at this from all sides.
100%. We need good mental health services in schools, programs that give families the tools they need. And our justice system, it can't just be about punishment. It needs to be equipped to handle what's going on with these young people, the root of the problem.
It really makes you think this isn't just some, I don't know, abstract thing. This is real life happening in families all over. And sometimes it ends tragically.
And that's why we need to raise awareness, why it's so important to understand this. We need more resources, especially for younger people. We can't just react after something terrible happens. We got to be proactive, building communities that are there for kids and families that support them.
That's such a good point. It's not enough to just be shocked by these stories. We have to actually do something. So what can our listeners do? Where do we even start to make a difference? That's the thing, right? How do we go from feeling horrified, even helpless, to actually doing something? It's like these issues, they're so huge. What can one person even do?
It's easy to feel that way, definitely. But honestly, even small things, just showing you care, it can make a difference. First thing is, we got to start seeing mental health like we see physical health. It's important. We got to pay attention to it.
So, okay, where do we start? What can our listeners actually do? Like right now, if they want to help.
All right, well, first thing, learn about it. There are some great organizations out there doing really important work on youth mental health, like NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or the American Academy of Pediatrics. They have tons of info on their websites.
Right, okay, so start by getting informed. Makes sense. Knowledge is power and all that.
Exactly. And don't underestimate just listening, without judging. If you know someone, a young person who's having a hard time, just being there for them, letting them know they're not alone, that means a lot.
It's about making it okay for them to talk about it, to reach out for help.
That's it. And look, if you're worried about a kid, a teenager, talk to a professional. School counselors, therapists, their doctor, those folks can help families get connected to the right resources.
This whole case, as hard as it is to hear about, it reminds us this isn't just, some other people's problem. This is happening in our own backyards, in our schools, to our families. We all have a part to play in making things better for young people, making the world safer.
It's so true. It's easy to get caught up in how awful this is, all the pain and how complicated it is. But I hope what people take away from this deep dive is hope. Because if we understand this better, if we talk about it openly and honestly, if we work together to build communities that care, then we can stop these tragedies from happening.
And hey, if you're listening to this right now and you're the one who's struggling, if you're feeling lost, you are not alone. Reach out. Seriously, there are people who want to help you. Resources out there, you don't have to go through this alone. We'll put some links in the show notes for this episode.
We've covered some really heavy stuff today, but it's got to start with awareness, right? So let's take all this, the sadness, the anger, even the fear, and turn it into something positive. Let's do better for our kids, for our families, for everyone.
I love that. Thank you so much for being here, for helping us understand this, even though it's so tough to talk about. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Keep the conversation going. Learn more. Find ways to make a difference in your own world. Take care of yourselves and each other.